about it, what happens is things are happening all the time. Spirit is constantly talking to us, communicating with us. So when I know that I've got a talk coming up, unless I'm doing a series of talks somehow, it's what's supposed to come next, and I'm just doing talks by the week as they come forward as Spirit directs, I listen closely. All week. Last week was entitled "Out of the Box," and it was about the cat being out of the box, and how that relates and how that becomes a metaphor for life itself. And this week, I wasn't thinking about that. I wasn't paying attention nearly as much as I normally do, and so it sort of caught me off guard to know what to talk about. How am I doing so far? So far I'm killing time. No. So here's what happens. This is Martin Luther King's birthday. We've got a re-election of our first, they call him our first Afro-American president. He's really our first mixed race president. He's part African and part white, parts a lot of things like we all are. But it's nice to see that and recognize that. And to think that there was a man who allowed himself to be like the very point of the spear, who stood forth and he said, okay, somebody's got to jump out there and do this, and it might as well be me. That, I'm just God appearing as me, so I will jump out there and I will be the one who gives these talks because I have this eloquent voice and I will say, I have a dream, and I will do all these wonderful things that have gone down. I mean, this is right next to 20 years ago, and all this, all this. It's just as big a deal. It's a part of our American history. Very, very important. Why is it so important? Because both of these men, Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., and others, were speaking on a spiritual level. Speaking to our hearts, not our minds necessarily, in a way that rouses us and stirs us and makes and strums that chord within us that says, this is true. This is deeply true. This is what I'm here to be a part of. And so here was a man who, in seeking peace, did what he had seen someone else do in the past and used a method to bring about change. That's what Martin Luther King Jr. did. He borrowed a way of changing the political picture in people's minds that he borrowed from Gandhi. This idea of civil disobedience, standing forth with your brothers and sisters and others who stand forth and say, here I am, and I'm not going to fight you, I'm just here. What are you going to do about it? And so Bull Connor and other people in Selma, Alabama said, well, we'll put a stop to that. And they made, actually, fools of themselves when they showed that violence and contention and aggression against truth just pales in comparison. He showed it to be such a foolish thing to hang on to it. The governor of Alabama standing in the door of the school looking so Don Quixote-ish. Now, quixotic, I think is the word that's used. Quixotic. He stood there knowing that he's speaking to his contingency, his people, his constituency, speaking to them, and they're saying, right on, right, yeah, that's the way to do it. Well, of course, they wouldn't have said right on, that's a hippie kind of term, but they would have said, damn straight is what they would have said. Stand in that door, bar them from coming in. We don't like change, we don't want change. But change, it did. For the better. Life changed for the better. And here's the funny thing about that, The oppressed got changed for the better. And so did the oppressors. That's what's such a wonderful thing about this kind of truth. Let's carry it all the way back to our founder, not Charles Fillmore. Let's carry it further back to our real founder, Jesus the Christ. He did the same thing. He didn't fight. But he put out an idea and then stood there as a spear point saying, somebody's got to be the Messiah. It might as well be me. And he stood forth and said, if this is what you need, here I am. And that same thing happened. Oppression, aggression, tension, contention, forced against him, and who actually ends up being the victor in all that? Truth, with a capital T. Truth becomes the victor. And people change. And not only were the people who supported this idea changed and transformed, but so were the oppressors changed. We all know that. We see the history of it. This happens in nature. A rocky shore is turned to a sandy shore, given enough time, given enough truth, pounding against it, over and over and over. That which stands against ends up standing with, or being transformed and becoming a part of. The same thing is happening now in our country. We see many ways in which our country has changed. We see this happening, and we see people fighting against the change, rallying against the change, doing everything they can to oppress those who want and need and deserve a change in attitude, in many ways in our society. It's beginning to change. When I was a young boy, my first experience with anyone with long hair was Davy Crockett on television. And I thought, I want to grow up to be like Davy Crockett. And I told my mother, I want to grow my hair like Davy Crockett. And she said, when you're old enough, if you still want your hair to be the length of Davy Crockett's, you can be my guest. But as long as you're our little boy, no, you will go down and get your hair cut the way we want it cut every week. And so I did. Every week! Well, if you think about it, if you got a flat top and you want it to stay flat, you've got to get your hair cut every week in order to keep it flat. And it only cost 75 cents back then. Let's don't go there. But I've often wondered, how did the barber live on the amount of money that was charged? It's just the way things were back then. So then the day came when I was in college. I was no longer living at home. And my mother said, you haven't cut your hair. You're not cutting your hair. Why aren't you cutting your hair? You probably think I'm going off on some little divergent path, but I'm not. Here's the point of all this. I told my mother, well, look, you told me that when I got up old enough to decide for myself if I wanted to grow my hair as long as Davy Crockett's, I could, and so that's what I'm doing. Now look at where we are. Now it's no big deal. But it was a grand big deal at one time. So many things in our lives are such a big deal that we have to stand against them. We have to take a stand someplace. And when we're taking those stands, oftentimes we realize as we look back at it later, wow, that was totally unimportant. Totally unimportant. The same thing happened, I grew up in a society where in Oklahoma, in the midst of the plains, in the heart of the Bible Belt. We used to call it the buckle of the Bible Belt. That's where it all buckled together, right there in Oklahoma, or in that part of the country. And we had what they called in South Africa apartheid. We called it segregation. It was the same thing. We saw that happen. I grew up in a society where there were no people of color around me at all. unless they worked for somebody and they came in from their town, their own town in Oklahoma, their own town called Arcadia. And they came to my town, Edmond, to work for some of the wealthier people, and they would work there, and then they'd come and they'd leave and go back out and stay in Arcadia. That's their town. It seemed strange to me when I went to college that we were all mixed together. I mean, I would think in my mind, wow, there's a black person sitting over there in my classroom. It was so different. I got over that. I'm glad I did. The oppressive thoughts in my mind were transformed. And because they were, and the fears that were in my mind were transformed, then I was able to be a happier, more balanced person. The same thing applied to homosexuality. The people that I thought should be condemned, now I'm changed. I'm changed. And I realized that it's none of my business. And that these people are who they are. And that I love them, and I don't even like to say the word these people. I mean, they're people. They're just people. Isn't that great to be transformed in that way? Isn't it great to have those kind of barriers that we create in our mind lowered so that we can be free to love? Love in a greater degree than we were able to love before. Now, what's going to be next? We see this changing in our society where gays, lesbians, and people of transgender, bisexuality are being more and more accepted. Slowly, yes, slowly, but more and more accepted. We see this happening. This isn't destroying our society, it's actually strengthening our society. You know, the same cry you hear of, if we allow this, then our society will go down, was the same cry that went out when blacks went to school. If we allow this, our society will go down. It even got to, there was even a point there where if we allow this rock and roll music to be in our society will go down. Just didn't happen that way. Yeah, it's different. It's a little edgy. It's a little different to a great degree, but it's still there. When I grew up, everyone of every trade, it seemed like, had their own uniform that they wore. The man who filled up your car with gasoline, checked the oil, had his uniform that he wore. The milkman had his white uniform. The man who serviced your plumbing, his own uniform that he wore. My father wore a uniform. He was an electrician and a plumber. He wore a uniform every day. He went in and took the most starched clothes you have ever seen in your life. So starched that he would have to pull apart the legs on his pants to put his pants on. Pull apart the sleeves to get his arm down in the sleeve. That's how starched they were. It's just unbelievable how some things have changed. Some for the better, some not so elegant, but still change occurs. So, where are we in all that? Are we longing for some good old days? Some days in the past? Or are we saying these are the good old days? Which are we doing? Or are we just allowing ourselves to be grateful and accept what is? Today is a day when, or tomorrow, or this weekend, or however you want to look at it, is a time when we celebrate an idea that someone said, that's wrong. It's been wrong a long time. And somebody ought to do something about it. I'm somebody. I think I will. And he spoke up and spoke out for the truth. He changed the face of an entire nation. because it was time for it to change. Oh, it was, Lord, it was way past time for it to change. And because it actually helped us be a stronger people. There's still change to be done. There's more change. The question for you, each of us, is, are we going to be a part of the change? Are we going to accept it? Are we going to look for the truth and the love in it and see and weigh it, discern it in our minds and in our hearts? Are we going to be strummed by that truth and awakened more and more to the truth of God and the truth of spirituality? Or are we going to hold on to something from the past and be, in a way, in chains ourselves? Are we going to allow that to continue within us? It's very subtle, you see. It's very subtle, because what you get used to becomes what you believe is all there is. Once you're so used to it, it becomes all there is, then that's reality for you. It's time for that little nudging of spirit, constantly nudging us, saying, take away this veil, peel back this layer of the onion, see what else is there. What else is there? Within you, within your society, within your family of origin, your family, your church family, whatever your family is, your friends. Look a little deeper on a daily basis. Just look a little deeper within. Say to yourself, how better can I connect? How better can I be transparent in order to free myself and free the world that I live in?